Hey, Sean, we're going live. Who do you want to do a shout out to?
Man, just right into it. Okay. Yeah, I'm going to give a shout out to my wife Laura. She has been my companion and most beloved for, gosh, almost 24 years. It'll be
That's a long
24 years.
time.
Yeah, this August it'll be 24 years. So, if I got to give a shout out, I have to give a shout out to my lovely wife Laura.
Laura, here we go. Hey guys, we are back with another amazing guest today, Shaun Rosado. I talked with Shaun probably we usually have before the show starts, we usually have like a 15-minute meet and greet that we where I get to meet the guests and find out who they are and everything. No. With Shaun, it was completely different. I'm gonna tell you a little bit about him. Shaun is a self-proclaimed and he's a massive pop culture and all things geek kind of guy. Okay. He is the number one fan for the Flash. We might even ask him questions because I got questions about time travel, but he is amazing. We talked about the world and whether it is doomed or not. And Shaun's position is the world is not doomed. And we talked about it for almost an hour. It's the longest I've ever done with anybody for a meet and greet. Shaun, welcome to the show. Let's talk about some Flash. Let's talk about the world not being doomed.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, whatever you have to ask, please. Yeah, I gave Michael a warning. I said if this was only supposed to be 15 minutes, we might go a little over.
Yeah,
But
going over is not bad at all. I don't have a problem with that because this your view of the world, I think, is one a view that more people really should try to adopt. Okay.
yeah, I tend to be an optimist.
Huh. Is it just me or did Shaun freeze? I think Shaun might have frozen.
Um, oh, am I back?
Oh, there you're back. You're back. I love you now.
No, sorry about that. My internet, hopefully my internet stays more stable. I can always jump on my hotspot as well if I have to. I
Okay.
apologize for that. But yeah, I was going to say that I am actually one of the reasons why I'm so optimistic is I tend to look at the world through the lens of the Flash when I was a kid.
Really?
So yeah, the Flash always tended to be for me somebody who was aspirational, who always tried to see the best in people, and that just kind of grew into my DNA. My dad and my mom were always fairly optimistic people. They told me to always try to see people for who they were and what they try to do. And I thought, how do I explain this? When I was very young, I had a decision to make. I could either look at the world as being bad and crap and negative, or I could actually say there is something good and positive here. And I believe that if we take a long view of the world, we can always find positivity. It's just so much easier to lean into the negative because, as we talked about in the pre show, negativity, pain, is a very good teacher. So that's always something that kind of comes back up and tends to reinforce the things that we want to believe that are negative because pain, teaches us very quickly.
I think you hit me with that, and that is so true. Whether or not you praise people or give them the negatives and what
Mhm.
goes on the news. But the thing that really struck me was the fact that you said we can instantly communicate around the world now. So
Yes.
we see more stuff than we used to be able to see.
Mhm.
Talk about that just for a little bit.
Absolutely. So, one of the things we talked about in our pre interview was the fact that when you look at the world today, people say it's so much worse. It's so much gloomier. There's so many more things that are happening. How can we possibly, as a species, be capable of overcoming all of this? And the interesting part is statistically, people are healthier, they're safer, and they have more enriching lives on a statistical basis than they ever have in the history of humanity up until this point. But because we can communicate with this wonderful creation called the internet, we have the capability of seeing so much more of the negative as well. And as we talked about, I used to work in news. I
Hmm.
worked in television for about a decade, and that was around the turn of the 21st century. So I was working in news media when 9/11 happened, and all those Middle Eastern wars started up at the beginning of the 21st century. And one of the things that they had always asked of us was, how can we keep people's eyes glued to their television sets, and then, of course, to the internet and so on and so forth. And there's this really horrible quote that is unfortunately 100% applicable, which is, if it bleeds, it leads.
Hmm.
Today, we'd call it something like clickbait. But the idea behind it is, if we can engage that fear mechanism inside of you, we can then keep you glued to us. So it doesn't behoove news, it doesn't behoove media to show you all the different kind of aspects of humanity. They want to show you the thing that's going to keep you going. What's going to happen next? How can I get out of this? And that's something that we deal with, because we now see all of the abundance of negativity without the equal positive side of it. And that can be overwhelming.
I just wonder, has there ever been a news station channel that is positive? I mean, I guess you've got maybe the Christian stations, but that's only catering to that group of people.
Right.
You've got has there ever been a station that really just says, you know what, we're gonna look for some good in the news?
Well, if I can have just 1 second to platform here, because
Yeah.
I have one very strict kind of tenet in my head that I've grown over the last 20, 25 years, which is the worst mistake that the United States ever made when it came to news media was, a little known fact is the airwaves, all the frequencies that we have in America are technically loaned to corporations. So your local ABC and NBC, they're technically renting those airwaves. And the return value was that Congress said this needs to be a tool of education. News needs to be given to people. So the exchange was, for control over that frequency, X times a day, you would be able to, you had to give news to the populace.
Okay.
Um, when they made this rule, I really felt that they should have made a rule that says, but you cannot monetize that airtime.
There you go.
And that's honestly, I think what happened is that because we've monetized news, we now have a reason to keep pulling people back in, which is why, for me, some of the best news sources are the news sources that have the least amount of advertising. So your PBSs, your NPRs, BBC is pretty good about not really showing anything. They just give you the news and then they kick off to the next commercial afterwards. But during their program, it's pretty much just the news. I tend to go to those kind of news sources first, or just read straight off the AP wire.
Yeah.
Because, as we talked about, and again, I apologize to everybody. I keep referring to the conversation we had before. um,
That's okay. It was fascinating. I need to hear it again myself. So
right.
we'll just
Is
pretend I didn't hear it the first time
right.
and
We'll just
listen to the
pretend. Yeah.
recording. Yeah.
We'll just pretend. Is the fact that news should not be super entertaining. Like I made this metaphor of cereals. Like we tend to look at news now like as Captain Crunch, or like your favorite cereal, and or we said like Honey Nut Cheerios, and it really just needs to be cornflakes. It
Yeah.
Like news, the more boring news is, the more reliable usually I find it to be. And I gave an example of, if I was talking about just a statement such as, if I say the world is not doomed,
Right.
NPR or somebody who's just trying to report that would say, Shaun said the world is not doomed.
Okay.
Whereas maybe somebody who is trying to take a pot shot at me, Shaun very naively said the world is not doomed. And that right there, they inserted in adjectives and verbs to describe my mental state, or their interpretation of my state changes the context of my sentence. Or
Absolutely.
you can take it the other way. Shaun confidently and without hesitation said the world is not doomed. And even that is an editorial versus just saying Shaun said this.
Right.
So I tend
Now,
to tell, I'm sorry, go ahead.
the question here is, when do we add or not add that editorializing, right? Because there are announcements that will be made like
Hmm.
the war is over,
Hmm.
World War II is over.
Hmm.
These are the victors, these are the losers.
Right.
Everyone gets to put their own headlines on it, right? Like, get
Hmm.
to say, like, those horrible Americans did this, or the Americans would say, we did this and it was so great, right? So, how does one decide what headline to put up there and really get people into the news? Oh, that's a really good shot of Sean. I like it a lot.
I so apologize here. I'm going to switch over to my hotspot real quick. I apologize that my hotspot is just giving me the grief right now. Am I back? Am I good?
You are good.
I am so sorry. I will make sure that I'm just hardwired in for the next time. So that way, I'm just running off my Wi-Fi in my office, and it's going wonky,
Gotcha.
and I apologize.
You're doing good.
Okay,
Okay.
I'm sorry. So I missed the last part of that. So if you could tell me your sentence again, please.
The question was about the headlines. It's like
Mhm.
nobody just wants to see Sean said. They want to hear. I think that's because most people don't know how to form their own opinions, right, about the
Definitely.
news. So headlines is what people watch. They read the headline, they read the next
Mhm.
headline, they might read the first sentence, right?
Right. Well, this comes to a concept that we haven't actually had a chance to talk about yet, which is meaning. And the reason why we're in such a weird state of flux right now is because we're dealing with a new type of media. The ability with the internet, with Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, whatever we're on Facebook. The internet has allowed everybody to start to communicate at instantaneous speeds, and we're exchanging ideas so quickly that editorializing is naturally bleeding into the conversation. But it's also getting rid of meaning, of context. And what I
Mhm.
mean by that is if you look at the statistics going around the world right now, the most, the fastest growing group of people, as far as in belief in religion, are the people who do not believe in religion. So the people who are agnostic or atheists. And for centuries, thousands of years, humans have held on to religion as a set of rules or meanings that allow us to kind of find purpose in our day-to-day life. And so that's like the original version of meaning. A more modern version of meaning would be what we'd like to call liberalism, or the modern think tank. And that kind of stuff is going to be stuff like academia. So you're
Mhm.
talking about all of your academic institutions, your news media, the belief in the corporate good, like capitalism, or that businesses will actually provide you with wealth, and even things like medicine have all come under scrutiny. Big pharma.
Yep. Big pharma's just as good as. I love that phrase. One of the things that we had talked about when Sean was in the green room before was the fact that uh, we are able to take care of
The
diseases now.
oxy.
There you go.
Mhm.
Now you're back.
Mhm.
Yeah, we lost you for about right now, 10 seconds, 15
I
seconds.
apologize. I do not know what's going on with my. I so apologize, everybody, for that.
No
Terrible. I'm
problem.
a terrible person.
When we actually replay this, we're going to
Mhm.
cut everything that you said into sentences that I like instead.
Okay, that's okay. I'm
we're
okay
going to
with that.
edit.
Absolutely.
We're going to editorialize the heck out of it. So
Please do. Please do. Yes. Yes.
yeah. So we were talking about we had the religion before. Now we've
Yes.
got the liberal kind of look on things.
Mhm.
And where does that lead us to? What's happening
So
there?
what's happening now is because we have all the interconnectivity, because we have all of those connections that are happening, we are now having to look at kind of what is known as an inflection point. And inflection points happen throughout human civilization, and they lead up to something that is normally known as what is known, what's the word I'm looking for? Rapture. Or raptive ideologies. So, rapture ideologies are basically the idea that the world as we know it is screwed.
Hmm.
We are at a point where in the very near future it's going to happen, this thing that we cannot fix. Only I, or we, or this collective group has an answer, and we need to get through that as quickly as possible in order to then get on the other side and prove that we're right. um, who cares what the collateral damage is? And this kind of ideology that starts to appear basically shows up in nationalism. It shows up in things like fascism. It basically shows that we as a species want somebody to help us find meaning. Because that's why you see things like what's the word I'm looking for? I apologize. That conspiracy theories
Yeah,
start to just propagate everywhere. And so you hear about this, and this happens on the left, this happens on the right, this happens to.
happens to everybody. When Sean does come back, I want him to take this idea and actually throw it onto some things that are prevalent in our society right now. Things like climate change, things like
You start.
disease, things like longevity. There you are.
Yeah.
Um, let's take that
I,
whole idea that you were just talking about
yes, sir.
and let's put it on top of a concept that everyone's worried about. Because one of the things that we talked about, and I
Mhm.
really hadn't thought about, is You said these people that are growing up now that are only 15, 16, 17, 18 years old have
Yes,
lived their lives with turmoil, right?
yes,
And
yes.
so go talk about that because that was absolutely fascinating.
Absolutely. So we have all this going on. We have all of these problems that are occurring. We have people who are moving into weird points of view, whether they're believing in the world is completely doomed, or oh my gosh, I have to lean into this kind of nationalism, or whatever it is. And kids are seeing this. People who are 30 years and younger. I think they said upwards of almost 60% of a group of individuals 30 years and younger believe that the world is just absolutely screwed. And that's because they do not have the capability of seeing the bigger picture because they have been in a traumatic response their entire life. And
Right.
trauma is something that is what a psychiatrist would call it is mental pain, is mental agony. Mental trauma is just as real as physical trauma. Our minds cannot differentiate between I have broken my bone and somebody severely harming you in a mental state versus that. And what it is, there's actually a term. It's called VUCA, which basically means that when you're in this state, you're feeling vulnerable, uncertain. This is also complex and ambiguous.
Okay.
And what that means is you as a human have all these really complex feelings. You don't know how you're going to get out of it. So you're constantly feeling like anything can come and get you, whether it be good or bad, you don't know what's coming. And that puts in your fight or flight reflex. So all this damage just builds up and there's no release.
I when we talked before, one of the big topics we talked about was climate change,
Yes.
right? And so for people who have only recently started living their lives and moving forward, climate change has been an issue for their entire lives. And so they've grown up with nothing but trouble and angst and these sorts of things.
Mhm.
So how talk about that also?
Yeah. So when you look at climate change, one of the things that we talk about a lot is, oh my gosh, we're not reaching the things we need to do to keep things exactly the way they are right now. And a really good thing that's happening in the world is, and this is kind of like the secret that we don't say out loud all that often because we don't want to stop progress in this way, is we're actually okay. When we started climbing this climate change ladder, we were projecting at one point that we were probably going to hit between 5 to 7 degrees Celsius of an increase, and this is around the year 2000. That would have been what is called a Holocene extinction event. That would destroy basically everything except for single cell bacteria and very, very kind of like simple life. Humanity, animals, we're all dead. Um, and that would have sucked. And in the last 20 years, and I say that kind of like jokingly, but you have to joke a little bit about this. But in the last 20 years, that projection has now gone from absolutely, we are completely screwed to okay, we're not nearly as screwed, but we're not out of the woods yet because we're now seeing that by the end of the century, we will hit a maximum of 3 degrees, which is not great. This is not saying, hey, we did a great job. Everybody go home, pack up your toys, we're done. But what we are saying is that we have gotten to the point now where humanity will survive
Okay.
and society will survive. It will be hard. There will be things that will happen that we will have to adjust to, and we are going to have a lot of empathy for people who are going to get hit because the lesser wealthy nations are going to be the ones who are going to take the burden of this, and we have to make sure that they have the resources to survive and to thrive. But indications are also showing that as these technologies are coming up that gauge is coming down and right now it's looking like we're probably going to hit between 2 degrees to maybe 2.3 degrees Celsius, which is a very, very good result. It's not
Yeah.
1.5, which is like that's what we wanted, but it's much better than the 5 to 7 degrees that we were talking about just 20 years ago.
Yeah.
That's massive. So,
So
yeah.
let's talk about that in terms of agendas and in
Mhm.
terms of the way that people feel and the way that people discuss this issue. Because on one side, you've got climate change is going to kill us. We're all
Mhm.
going to die soon. You go on the other side, it's like climate change is not real. Why are you people talking about this? And then we've got advertisers that make money off of it. And then we've got
Right.
all of us in the middle that have no idea if it's happening or not happening. We can
Right.
listen to scientists on both sides. Now,
Yeah.
that is a big problem.
It is a big problem. And we one of the things that we talk about again is this idea of the rapture ideology. So everybody's trying to make you see, oh my gosh, it's about to happen right now. So scientists who are like, you're finally paying attention to the problem, they want you to think that the world is completely doomed in 10 years. And that's because if we don't continue to improve, we will make things worse. So in an essence, you have to sometimes make things a little hyperbolic to make sure people pay attention, because immediate threats are always going to grab humanity's attention. A perfect example of us seeing a threat and fixing it would be the ozone layer.
Okay.
Basically, if you're talking about fluorocarbons that we used to have in hairspray and in our refrigerants and whatnot in the 80s, we could point and say, there's a hole above Antarctica and it's getting bigger. And pretty soon, we're not going to have that. And without the ozone layer, we're going to start getting horrible cancer because of mutations from UV rays. And within a decade, we said, nope, and we cut it all out. And by the end of this decade, that hole will be fixed. We've actually stopped one climate change catastrophe from happening. Like, we
Okay.
fixed it. So there is something about keeping the pressure on. But when you look at the fact that you also have companies who dug into the earth, drilled up coal, drilled up oil, they're also the companies who are now saying, hey, we're in a finite resource. We're going to now not going to be able to rely on these anymore. So we have to come up with the next big thing, renewable energy. So the people who put us in the situation where we need renewable energy are going to be the people who are going to get paid and have the patents for renewable energy. So they got paid to screw the planet, and they're going to get paid to unscrew the planet, which
Correct.
I admit is really bad. But at this point, I want the problem fixed. I don't care who gets rich off of it. I just want the planet to survive and humanity to survive. So if they get that money, fine. That's
Oh,
that's kind of how I look at it.
it's an amazing problem because it's who comes out being, and I don't even know if the right word is right. Who comes out being right? The
Mhm.
question is, who won, who lost. It's too big a problem for people to grasp. That's almost like a Game of Thrones. Like we've got basically the companies moving the pawns around, and we're just in the middle.
Well, I mean, there is also the idea of the us versus them ideology, which is actually very difficult. And this actually kind of goes towards why we as a species are not doomed. Um, when you look at technologies and as they're introduced into society, big technological shifts always radically change how we see the world. The printing press, as we've discussed, was the most radical invention to ever change humanity until the internet, because it allowed the written word to be printed in mass and to be distributed in mass, which means that you did not have to be someone rich to have what they used to call illuminated texts, where a person would actually write everything down for you. They could just put a bunch of block words together, print it, and there you go. You have a book.
Okay.
Um, that allowed literacy to quickly grow over the span of a century, century and a half, because it became inexpensive. And people then started to ask questions. Those questions led to more answers. And as a society, we grew. So when you look at today, with the internet, we are now seeing the same thing. But every time we introduce these kind of technologies, radical ideologies pop up. And when I talk about ideologies, I'm not talking about left versus right. I'm talking about people who are just concerned about things are changing and I don't feel normal anymore
Right.
because things are evolving past what I'm comfortable with versus the new thing that is coming into play. And you can go back and see this play again and again. And we're in one of those moments where information has become so free that like it's basically a genie in a bottle, or Pandora's box. We just can't put it back in, and we're
Right.
learning how to evolve as a species with it, and that means we're going to make some mistakes.
The thing about the internet though versus the printing press
Hmm.
is the amount of information and the speed that the information is available, whether it's right,
Yes.
wrong, good, bad, it
Hmm.
doesn't matter. It's like it's overwhelming, right?
It is.
So how long did it take us to overcome the printing press? I mean, up until TV, you know,
Um, yeah, I mean, honestly, we talked about like, the fact that as soon as the printing press was made and you were able to make things cheap and written and people were educated, propaganda began. People would start to put out, disingenuous ideas
mhm,
just to skew the argument towards their favor. We're seeing that happen now. people eventually get through the BS. We eventually start to see it. It takes time though, because we have to learn how to be able to see kind of the wheat from the chaff, to use a farming metaphor.
Yeah.
And it also means that we have to devise a system that makes us more, there's this term called anti-fragility. And anti-fragility basically is a very simple idea. There's an acronym that is known as SPIRE. And what that means is that we have to basically become resilient spiritually, physically, intellectually, relationship-wise, and also emotionally. And what that basically means is that physically, we have to basically find our purpose and try to decrease stress. Spiritually means we have to find our purpose. Physically means we have to engage our bodies and decrease stress. Intellectually means that we have to have a curious nature and also engage with subjects in a deep and meaningful manner. We just don't ask a question and then wait to speak again. We want to know. And that's, I think, the biggest thing that we're learning about right now is that people are truly curious. But without having the last two parts of that acronym, it doesn't work, which is the relationship side of it, meaning that you cultivate relationships that are genuine, true, honest, and also caring. So if you don't have good relationships with a significant other or with a group of friends, or even with somebody that you're having these intellectual conversations with, like you and I, that means that you're not able to have a genuine exchange of ideas. And that, of course, gives you also the emotional side of it, which is you have to be able to take care of yourself, which is something that goes back to how we interpret news, how we encompass news. And again, if we're encompassing and ingesting all of this material and we're getting traumatized by it, we have to find ways of detaching and focusing on ourselves, which is why I tend to go to the cornflakes of news, because
Yes.
I'm not getting opinions. I'm just getting facts, or at least what is being reported as facts at that moment.
Let me ask you this also then,
Yes,
because nobody likes cornflakes. We like sugar frosted flakes. We like
I
Cheerios.
know.
We like
Cornflakes are
everything.
garbage.
Okay. So the whole question I have here is most people, and I don't want to say this in a putting down people kind of way,
Yes,
but
sir.
most people don't have time to form an opinion
Mhm.
on climate change. They don't have time to form an opinion about whether kids are being kidnapped or whether or not things are happening. So
Right.
where can they go to actually be able to form their own opinions and understand what's happening in this world?
You know, so there's no easy answer for this, unfortunately. There's not a magic bullet. Um, Education is, okay, let me rephrase. There is a magic bullet, but that magic bullet is called education.
Okay.
Meaning that if we invest in education, and I'm talking about yourself, the viewers, I'm talking about teachers, for anybody who is curious and wants to learn, that's what we need to nurture as a society, because that is honestly how we figure problems out. So for me, I think, teachers should be paid like rock stars. I mean, whatever we pay a rock star, or at the very least, like a good quantum physicist, I'm talking these people should be paid rock star money. They should never have to worry about a house payment. A teacher
Okay.
is a person who is literally shaping the minds of the people who will continue our society when we're gone. And the beautiful part about us is that we as a species are all one long story. We
How
are
do you know
all,
which teacher then? In other words,
well, that's
right?
the thing.
Because you'll
Well,
have the
no, no, no,
differing
no.
opinions on everything.
But that's the beauty about it, is that differing opinions allow you to then create a more well-rounded opinion. So when you were asking about how do we find, good news versus bad news, or how do we find a way to, not be overloaded, go look at a subject and look at it through the lens of cornflakes for a moment, and go to
Okay.
NPR. And then go over to Fox News, and then go over to CNN, and look at that same subject through three different lenses. And then take what you consider good information, bad information, and neutral information, and then say, what is my opinion based on this? Doesn't mean that necessarily you're right or you're wrong, but you've made the effort to listen to multiple sides of an ideology to then say, I now have been given a well rounded opinion.
Okay.
Now, this doesn't mean
This doesn't mean that the internet won't freeze again. It does mean that we will be able to talk about this in much more detail because I am so fascinated by what Sean is saying. We are going to bring him on
everybody.
at least another dozen times.
I'm back. I'm back. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I don't know what
Yeah,
happened there.
no,
Sorry. I'm back. I'm
no,
sorry.
I got you.
um, But no, what I was going to say is that it doesn't mean that everybody who has an opinion is trying to communicate in earnest, because sometimes that means that, we talked about this before. I will let everybody and anybody have a conversation with me, but the amount of slack I'm going to give somebody depends on what they start talking about. If you start talking about how Hitler had the right idea and you wear a Nazi armband on your shoulder, guess what? You're going to get about that much rope, and then I'm done. I'm like,
Right.
I'm just going to walk away. So there
Right.
is a genuineness to the conversation, and hatred obviously has very little length, and should never be the center of an ideology. That kind of goes back to, like I said, that idea of the rapture ideologies, because those are people who are trying to get you to look at a idea of us versus them, and it's not us versus them. The thing that I always am staggered by is how much we share as a species and as a people and as humans versus what we don't. And the stuff that we don't agree on is far outweighed by the stuff that we do, and the people that we are. I've seen people who have spouted hateful rhetoric at a person who might be transgender or might be of a person of color, and then they'll see possibly a transgender kid or even that same person they were yelling at almost get hit by a car, and they'll yank that person out of the road. I've actually seen moments like that where that person who's like, "Ah, ah, ah," and then they'll just grab that and like make sure that person doesn't get hurt,
Right.
and I'm like, that person has a dichotomy in their head where they know what to do as an actual human, but they've got some bad wiring. They just picked up some bad information, and you can unplug that and make yourself better. So I don't feel that most people are bad or necessarily good. We're just a collection of ideas, and those ideas can grow and evolve as long as we continue to remember that whatever we're currently experiencing.
Maybe I can add my twist on this. Whatever we're experiencing is technical difficulties, and we're going to have Sean back on multiple times again. So there's so much more I
Is
really want to
just a
talk with Sean about. There we go. You're back.
Yep.
We're definitely going to have you back on this show. I want to talk about some specifics because I would love to
Yes,
go into the specifics of the child kidnapping sorts of things. I'd love to go into the specifics of climate change. I'd love to go into the specifics of
please.
world politics and
Hmm.
just opinions that people have. I'd love to go into the specifics of gender and identity and that sort of stuff.
Hmm.
And why do people have certain ideas about certain things? So I want to have you on again. I want to fix your internet, which is awesomely working right now, but we'll get
Yes.
that fixed.
I went into a private
And
room because my office sometimes will get phone calls, so I just tried to
yeah,
go into a quiet place. I should have just stayed where I was and plugged up and stayed plugged into my hardwire. But before we go, I did want to
yes,
give people one little piece of advice, which is when you are feeling overwhelmed, you have to, in yourself, create a new system in which you can create what I like to call guardrails. And guardrails are very simply ways for you to, when you're feeling unbalanced or when you feel the world is just turning upside down and you don't know what to do, these things are able to help you. One, find the time to allow yourself to heal. If you're feeling overwhelmed by the world, find something that gives you happiness, whether it's a video game, playing with your pets, being with your family, cooking food.
playing the
What
lottery.
well, I mean, do something that you can get an instant gratification for,
Yep,
okay? And allow that to happen and give yourself time with it. Don't give yourself 5 minutes, give yourself an hour, give yourself 2 hours, and be mindful of being in that moment. 50% of the time that you're awake, you're either thinking about the future or you're thinking about the past.
hmm,
That's actually a pretty like concrete number that we get from neuroscientists, which means that we're wasting half the time that we're experiencing life around us thinking about things that either have not happened yet or things that we cannot change,
right.
versus being in the moment and taking time to heal. Because when you're in the moment, it allows you to heal yourself. The second thing that you want to do is you want to basically find a way to open yourself up to ideas. Again, listen to people. Don't close yourself off just because it might be an uncomfortable conversation, but don't necessarily allow hatred to dominate the conversation. If that person turns into a toxic conversation, say, you know what, I think we're done for now, and then find a different conversation.
Right.
And then just continue to build up your anti-fragility. Take the time to find your purpose, to enjoy your time, to decrease your stress, to have a curious nature, to build good relationships, and to find fulfillment emotionally. And you're going to be okay because we've got this. And I will talk about all this stuff in more detail. So pick a topic and we'll go into it deep.
We'll pick a topic and go into it deep. One thing we did not go into, and we will. I want people to know. Look at your Facebook page, which is Pop Cycled, and talk
Oh
about
yes.
that. But we are definitely going to talk about some Flash and about time travel, and I want to figure out how that actually works with the Flash.
Okay, I could do that. And I could even talk to you about how time travel could actually work and how the multiverse works. I could talk to you about black holes. Oh my God.
We're doing it. It's not even a fantasy thing. We are going to
It's
do it.
not.
No, we're going to make it happen.
Yes.
So, Shaun, thank you so much for being on. You guys, when you've got questions for him, I guess what's the best way they can get in touch with you? Through Pop Cycled?
Well, of course, you can go to facebook.com/popcycle. That's where my wife and I make artwork, and we go to various conventions and we sell artwork. The only one we'll be at this year is at Dragon Con on Labor Day weekend. But you can also find me on multiple social medias at Numaz, which is, I think I put it in my name there. That's PNEUMAZ. I think you can find me on Twitter. You can find me on Instagram. Yeah, just say hello and ask questions. I usually do a bunch of Facebook blogs and whatnot, but that's usually for privacy, like just for friends. But if you ever are curious about stuff, I'm more than happy to share my ideas. I just tend to do it one-on-one because I believe that the best way to communicate sometimes is not necessarily trying to talk to an audience, is to have what we're having, which is a one-on-one conversation. Yeah. And if it helps two people, then that's two people I was able to help today. And I find that to be the best thing. Yeah.
Wasn't it Dan Rather, I think, or was it Mike Wallace that had the one-on-one conversations? Like, just you and me, no one's watching. It's on 60 Minutes,
so. Yeah,
right?
Yeah. It was the 60 Minutes. Yeah. Or Walter Cronkite, or actually the one that I love the most, because this man was the ultimate person who pushed back against those folks who had those ideologies that everything was terrible right now, is Murrow. Murrow in the 50s, when he was fighting against McCarthyism. That was a beautiful moment of, he would literally give McCarthy his entire show to respond however he would want to. And then on the next episode, he would rebut that and he would talk to people one-on-one. Seriously, like, we need more Murrows in this world. And if you think you can be one, be one.
Be one. It's interesting. I listened to multiple sides of arguments too. I think Jordan's doing that. I don't always agree with him, but I listen to what he has to say. So we're going to talk some more. I'm going to run us out of here.